Okay, thanks, Wanda. Hey, everybody, how you doing? Show going good? So just a show of hands, is anybody in the room today doing perpetual inventory? Does anybody know what the word perpetual inventory means? Well, we're going to talk about it if you don't. No? Okay, good. So yeah, as Wanda said, I'm going to talk about not just perpetual inventory and computer-assisted ordering, but also the ROI that you could reasonably expect from implementing a system to track perpetual inventory and then along with that, computer-assisted ordering, but it's mostly about perpetual inventory. So what we're going to cover today is, one, for those that don't know, what is perpetual inventory? What is computer-assisted ordering? We're going to go over some of that. Why does it matter? So why should you be considering it? What steps are involved to achieve it? Because it's not just a simple flip on a switch and you're doing perpetual inventory, right? So we're going to talk about that. And then what results can I expect? Okay? And we're going to actually use some real customer data to talk about some of that, what the results you can expect. Okay, so what is perpetual inventory? Well, basically, it's just knowing your on hand of items in your store at any given moment. So the ability to trust the computer and know that what the computer says my on hand reflects is what I believe and is reality, okay? If you're not doing perpetual inventory today and you have a inventory management system, chances are your on hands are all negative something, negative 400, negative 4,000, whatever, right? So the idea is that your on hands are accurate. That's basically it. And then what is computer-assisted ordering? Well, it's basically what the name suggests, the ability for the computer to help you in order or suggest. I don't like the word auto reorder or computer ordering. I like to use the phrase suggested ordering. So basically using the computer data to provide you with a suggested order or a fairly accurate order. Now there's different levels of computer-assisted ordering. Some are simple, and some don't even require your on hands to be accurate. So as an example, one, replenishment. Replenishment just simply looks at what was sold and doesn't necessarily look at your on hands, just produces a reorder based on what went through the register, right? And then there's other simple ones like min-max, when I hit a certain level of on-hand order X. So of course, your on-hands have to be accurate. Then there's things like maintain constant level, where you always want to keep a certain level of inventory at any given time, and the system just simply suggests to order back to that level. And then there's actual analytical, more complex computer-assisted ordering, where it actually looks at demand and actually can even create demand forecasts of what you may be selling in the future. And it can actually use data to actually accurately determine, or at least estimate, what the system thinks you're going to order based on past experiences, either past time frames or looking in the future from a previous years of data. So as you're coming into Thanksgiving, for example, it can be looking at last Thanksgiving and what kind of item movement, what kind of data or demand increased. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And so why does it matter? Well, one, obviously, if your on hands are accurate at any given time, you know the value of inventory in your store. So you know what's at risk on the shelf. And yes, inventory is at risk on the shelf. Now, a lot of times customers are just buying it, which is good, but it's at risk because it can also just walk out the door. And if you're not tracking it, you don't know how much walks out the door, right? Also, just having an efficient analysis of your product mix, knowing where items are at, what's selling, what's not selling, streamlining your ordering and enhanced suggested ordering. You know, when I like to say that computer-assisted ordering takes the emotion out of ordering. The computer is just basically looking at data, and it's creating an order based on that data. Whereas buyers, even though I'm not talking about eliminating buyers, and we'll talk about that a little bit, we're talking about giving them tools to make better buying decisions. But a lot of times buyers are emotional. They'll order something that maybe they shouldn't order, or they'll order too much of something, or too little of something, which is actually even worse. Also, it matters because it helps reduce out-of-stocks. Out-of-stocks are a killer to retail. The average grocery store, according to some studies, the average grocery store loses about just under 3% of sales on average due to lost sales due to out-of-stocks. So if you can control your out-of-stocks, Now you're going to keep that sale in your store. So what's the opposite of being out of stock? Well, overstock. So it reduces dead stock. People will sometimes combat the running out of stuff or having understock by actually ordering too much. And now all of a sudden you got the reverse effect. You got too much inventory. And just reducing dead stock. I'm not talking about slow movers, because you're going to have slow movers. I'm talking about dead stock, things that are not moving at all. It also improves customer satisfaction. I think one of the best forms of customer loyalty is actually have the products in your store when the customers want to buy them. One of the same study that talked about out of stocks that said the average grocery store loses close to 3% of sales due to out of stocks. They also said that 9% of the time, when a customer experiences an out of stock situation, they leave and never return to the store that had the out of stock. So if I can eliminate or reduce out of stocks, not only do I keep those sales, but now I keep my customer. And what's the lifetime value of a customer worth, right? And what does it take to replace a customer? So if I'm out of an item, that customer is not going to get that item from me that day. Are they going to wait for me to get it in and come back? Probably not. They're probably going to go somewhere else, right? And so if it happens enough, then you have the potential of losing a customer. So reducing your out of stocks, the reverse effect a lot of times is the dead stock. And then the customer satisfaction, if I can keep that customer satisfied, keep the products that they're looking for on the shelf, they're going to keep coming back to me. And improves gross margin. So we're going to talk about that in some of the proof data. But when you have these events of dead stock, out of stock, it all leads to, especially dead stock, it leads to waste. And especially in perishables, if it's not selling, you're throwing it out. And anytime you throw something out, it affects your gross margin because your cost of goods sold goes up. So having a streamlined inventory, having perpetual inventory, knowing what's selling, and then computer-assisted ordering will help you improve your gross margin. So it all sounds great, wonderful, right? How do you do it? How do you achieve it? So we've come up with a process. We've actually been doing this process and helping customers achieve perpetual inventory for a little over 20 years now. And we call it our ECRS 8 Steps to Automation. Now you'll notice, if you can count, I only have 4 on there. That's because this presentation is usually about a 45-minute to an hour presentation. And I had to cut it down to 25 minutes. So if you want to know what the other 4 steps are, our booth is 106 right outside. Come by and see me, and I'll be happy to go over some of the other steps with you. But we're going to talk about, there's actually 8 steps to the whole process. And you have to do all 8. If you only do 7, you're not going to achieve the results because your data is not going to be accurate. So step number 1 is data cleanup. You got to have clean data. You got to have items in the database. They have to be accurate. You also have to do some training with your cashiers to make sure that they're scanning everything. Number 2, scan rate, 99.5%. No more not on files, right? Scan an item, it says not on file, that means it's not in the system. You can't track it if it's not in the system. But it's also more than that, because you could have a situation where a customer's buying, let's say, Yoplait yogurt, and they got 4 different flavors, and the cashier just goes 4 quantity and scans 1. Well, now you just overstated the sales of 1 item and reduced on hand for 1 item and understated sales and on hand for the other 4. So they have to scan all flavors. So the scan rate is important. If you're not actually tracking the items going through the register, you're not going to have accurate data. And even eliminate open item usage. The item should not go on your shelf unless it's in the system. And one way to ensure that is to make sure that it's got a tag. If you can't print a tag for it, it's probably not in the system. So if you can't put the tag up when you put the item on the shelf, you probably shouldn't put it on the shelf. So, but 99.5% scan rate. Anything less than that, it's going to be difficult to have an accurate perpetual inventory, we found. Number 3 is full receiving. The other side of that you're already doing. Everybody orders today, right? You have to order products. You have to get them on the shelf because you can't sell them if you don't order them. The part that most people are skipping or are not doing at all, and why they can't attain perpetual inventory, is the full receiving side. So obviously when you order it in a perpetual inventory system, those items are now on order. You have to receive them to update your on order to on hand, or move the on order to on hand. And so, and we have some tools. We have an integration to AWG, for example, so we do automate a lot of that process, that receiving side, so the data comes in automatically. All you have to do is verify it. So it does make for the receiving process a lot less stressful. But that's the piece of the puzzle where most stores fail. Because if you don't receive, your on-hands are never going to get updated. And then the last step, I'm skipping 4 through 7 on purpose. The last step is auto reorder. And so choosing a method of auto reorder, computer-assisted ordering, and setting a strategy by item. Now, as I mentioned, sometimes that strategy, some items could be very simple strategies, min-max. When the item gets down to X, order X. In other models, it could be more of a demand model. We have a feature called demand fill, which, just like the name suggests, it creates a dynamic fill rate by every item based on the demand of that item. And it's continually recalculating that fill rate. So in the week before Thanksgiving, you sell a lot of cranberry sauce. That demand model is going to increase the ordering of cranberry sauce because it knows that demand is increasing. But as you're coming out of Thanksgiving, all of a sudden it falls off a cliff, it's going to stop ordering. So there's a lot more to it than that, but there's some models and settings that you can set to really tweak your inventory so that the system can accurately produce a suggested order. And again, it's designed for a buyer to then review, tweak and modify, and then submit. But it cuts down all of the time it takes for a buyer to actually buy, and as I mentioned, it cuts out the emotion of ordering. Computer just looks at data, and it creates a suggested order based on that. Okay. Now, the word auto reorder, the system will actually, we have customers, once you get to know it and get to trust the data, there is a process where the system can actually generate an order, send the order to AWG without any human interaction whatsoever. So if I had to have my order for AWG sent in by 1 o'clock on Monday and 1 o'clock on Thursday, I literally can set a schedule and the system will create that order and send it automatically without anybody ever touching it. But very few people do that. Most generate the order and then review it and tweak it. And so there's a lot of options for that. So now, why should you even bother doing perpetual inventory? Nobody in the room raised their hand that they're doing perpetual inventory today. So why would you go to the extra step? So I'm going to show you some actual results from some of our customers. Now, this is one customer in particular. We've got a lot of customers. When we put a customer through a perpetual inventory program, or the 8-step program, we typically take a snapshot of where they're at before and then where they're at a year later. So the idea there is we're trying to prove the value, right? So this is actual customer data. This is a customer that went through the perpetual inventory program in one year. This was the result after a year. So one, they had a 99.8% scan rate. Now there's reports in our system that actually will tell you what your scan rate is. So that's how we know what it is. So he had actually better rate than we actually recommend, which is good. He had a 19% increase in gross margin. So his sales less cost of goods sold, gross margin, increased by 19%. His overall sales increased by 12% in that 1 year. So the 1 year from starting in a perpetual inventory, 1 year later, 12% increase in sales. Now this isn't a customer who has only been in business 2 or 3 or 4 years, where double-digit growth might be okay or might be even expected sometimes. This customer has been in business like 30-plus years. So 30-year-old company having a 12% increase in sales is pretty unheard of, right? Unless you open another store or something. He didn't. He didn't open another store. He also, every quarter, he was paying a third-party inventory service to do an inventory of his store, just for his own accounting purposes, and then once a year doing a physical inventory for tax purposes. Because his inventory was so accurate, he didn't have to do that anymore. So he stopped paying that third-party service. So he saved thousands in cost of hiring third parties. Now, I don't know exactly how much because he didn't really say. All he said was thousands. He did a quarterly inventory and he did a once-a-year inventory, and he paid a third party to do that. He didn't have to do that year at all because he can generate an inventory report that showed the value and the quantity of every item on hand that year. Along with the 12% increase and the 19% margin increase, he had a 17% decrease in SKU count. So his actual number of items that he carried in the store at the end of that year dropped by 17%, which is basically the dead stock, I guess you could say. You know, you've probably heard the old adage, 20% of your inventory is fast, 20% is slow. The reality is actually that's a good gauge, I guess you could say. Reality, most stores have about 40% slow and 10% fast. The idea behind perpetual inventory and computer-assisted ordering is to flip those numbers, to actually reduce your dead stock and increase your hot movers. So he actually reduced the inventory count by 17%, and his on-hand inventory value decreased by 11%. So he did 12% more in sales with 11% less in actual inventory. Okay? Now, we've found this is pretty typical. On average, when a customer implements a perpetual inventory system, on average, their sales increase between 10 to 12% in the first year. So one, you're getting that 3% that you're already losing because of out of stocks, or at least a good portion of it. You're keeping your customers. You're not losing the 9% that go shop somewhere else. So what's the lifetime value of a customer worth, right? And so if you keep them, you're going to keep making sales to them. And, hey, if you're the only game in town doing perpetual inventory, you might even be incrementally taking some of your competitors' 9% that are actually leaving and finding the product at your store. So those are some of the reasons why the sales would actually increase. The other thing that he achieved after the end of the first year is his net margin. So you got your sales, cost of good, which is gross profit, and then your net after all expenses rose by 3 points. So if the year before his net margin was 6%, at the end of that year it was 9%. So it rose 3 points, not 3%, 3 points. So his net margin also grew that first year as well. And so perpetual inventory, there's nothing magic about it. It's really just a process. The easy part is using the technology to actually find a product and a partner to help you implement it. And we're not the only game in town, obviously. I'd love for you to come see us, but most of the inventory management systems out there today can do perpetual inventory. They have inventory. They can do ordering. The piece that I think, and the reason why most supermarkets don't do perpetual inventory has nothing to do as much with the technology, because even if you're just doing min-max or replacement or whatever, it has more to do with the partner and somebody that can teach you the process. You know, the 8-step program that we implemented is a process, and we teach it, and we train, and we help you change your processes, because the hard part is changing the culture. Nobody likes change, especially your buyers. When you start implementing a perpetual inventory system, people are going to tell you, I've been doing this for 20 years, nobody can tell me how to order. Well, guess what? The computer can, because the computer takes the emotion out of ordering. The computer looks strictly at data. It knows that, hey, this item is selling, this item's not. This item is selling, and you would have sold more if you hadn't run out 4 days ago. And it takes into account that you ran out 4 days ago and what you could have sold if you hadn't run out, and adds that to the next projection or the next order. So it's really just looking at data. It's just a computer. So that's the hard part, changing the culture and getting your people to embrace it. And some of the reasons why people, and this is also, I think, a misconception. A lot of people think that computer-assisted ordering is designed to get rid of people. It's not. In fact, I don't know of a single customer that we have that has implemented a perpetual inventory system, and we've got a lot of them, that all of a sudden started laying off people. What they did is they repurposed those people to tasks that actually make them business, make them money. And instead of spending, we call it automating the mundane. Basically, creating an order is kind of mundane. You walk around with a handheld and you scan the holes, right, or whatever, the gaps. And if the computer can generate that order for you in literally 2 seconds, and all you got to do is review it and accept it and send it, now you can spend time doing other things that actually make the company money. Just think if your people were able to greet your customers as they walk in the door, ask them if they can help them, how much more sales could you do, as opposed to spending all the time on the floor doing ordering, right? So, all right, so any questions? Nope.
How would you, when you have an item in the ad, I'm assuming you just program it in a certain way?
Yeah, so there's models that can actually adjust based on artificial uplift, for example. So when you have an item in an ad and it creates an uplift in inventory or uplift in movement, our system actually has some adjustments that you can do for ad items. Now you can tell the system how to handle ad items. What I usually tell people, again, it's not designed to take your buyers out of the equation, because you're still going to rely on buyers, because you got things like that, like, hey, we got an ad coming up, I know we need to increase the order 20%, whatever. Or, I got a snowstorm coming, we got to stock up on bread and milk because the computer doesn't know you got a snowstorm coming or anything like that. So you're still going to have to adjust, and you're still going to have to use your knowledge for that. The idea is the computer is looking at the data and saying, hey, here's my best guess on what I think you're going to need, and then from there you can adjust it. There are models that will adjust based on that artificial uplift because of an ad flyer or something, but it's still not perfect. Your buyers are still going to have to get involved.
And then out of stocks, you would have to probably let it know that you didn't receive the product.
Correct. Well, now, so yeah, exactly. Now, there's some models, and thank you. And there's some models that, first of all, and I'll just use the demand field model as an example. One of the questions in that model is days of stock, right? So what I usually tell people when you're talking about days of stock, you have to look at shelf life, first of all. You never want more days of stock than what it's going to last on the shelf. And then second is frequency of ordering. You should never be doing just-in-time inventory. If you order from AWG twice a week, you're not going to have 4 days of stock, right? You're typically going to have a minimum of 3 order cycles, as long as shelf life's not a concern. And so if the vendor is out of it one time, you still have enough. The next order cycle, it'll just order more. If they're out of it again, you still have enough, it'll just order a little bit more. If you run out a third time, then yeah, you could run out. And then for out of stocks, our system actually looks at potential out of stock situations, looks at the sales trend of an item, and if it sees that an item automatically went to 0 for 3 days, it looks at that 0 and it throws it out of the equation because it says, hey, you didn't have it available for sale, so I'm not going to add it into the average. So it comes up with a better average. So the models can take care of the out of stocks, and of course, you never want that just-in-time inventory to make sure you're not running. That's one of the things you hear a lot. Oh, I'm out of it because the supplier didn't have it. Well, if you're out of it on one order cycle because the supplier didn't have it, then you were already understocked. Because no grocery store does 52 turns a year, which means they sell out their inventory every week, right? The average store probably does 18 to 20. Good stores do 25 to 30. That's still, how many order cycles do you do in that time, right? So that's really you're ordering too little or too late, or so. Any other questions? So as I said, booth 106, if you want to know the other 4 steps to the 8-step process, I'll be happy to share them with you. Spend a little time with you if you have any other questions. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the show.